Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Deanna Faye and I do things just a little bit differently here. And today I'm going to be talking about C.S. Lewis, the author of the classic children's series, The Chronicles of Narnia.
Aslan is on the move.
So in December of 1959, a young student wrote to C.S. Lewis asking for advice on writing, if he had any. And C.S. Lewis attempted to give advice to this young student, and he actually gave us 8 pieces of solid gold writing advice, and I think that it can be applied to any art form or any artist's work. I'm going to be analyzing each piece of advice, giving my thoughts on what they might mean, as well as attempting to update each piece of advice so that it actually can apply to today's world and to other forms of writing, including songwriting. Let's get right into it. So the very first tip that C.S. Lewis gives us is to turn off the radio. Considering the year that this advice was written, in 1959 Britain, I think radio would have likely been the most common form of media consumed other than reading, newspapers, magazines, books. And television was actually still in its early years in Britain, although this advice was given exactly during a transitional period in Britain when families just started to view more TV in Britain. And I think that he's suggesting we turn off our radio when we're writing. It's because it'll give us our mind less distractions and that it's easier to stay in that sort of flow state while writing. That could all be very distracting and fills your mind with sound and noise that you don't necessarily want when you want to have that sort of clear head. And I think you could apply this piece of advice to today, basically to any form of media, especially social media, YouTube, Netflix, Reels or Shorts, anything that is distracting visually or audibly, I would turn off if you're having difficulty writing, having difficulty getting in the flow of writing. While sometimes I think it's nice to have music playing when writing, I find that when I'm completely free from distracting media, I have clearer thoughts and ideas forming. Read all the good books you can and avoid nearly all magazines. So the imagination is basically like a muscle, or at least that's how we can think of it in this scenario. Reading allows us to strengthen our mind, our imagination, to practice it. When you're reading words that describe a particular image or images, the reader, you can manipulate and expand upon that image in your mind. It almost like create your own world in your head. Reading also builds up our knowledge and opens the mind to new ideas and thoughts. Because it strengthens our imagination, it allows us to come up with new ideas, new understanding, and could even lead to discoveries. So I think reading is really, really important for improving your abilities as a writer, as an artist. And this is something that's talked about a lot. And while I think that any reading that isn't just reading on social media is healthier and better for you than not reading at all, but I think books might still be best because they actually improve your concentration, your vocabulary, they enhance your imagination and even increase your empathy, but they even improve your brain health by lighting up certain areas of the brain and strengthening those connections. So that's a really cool reason for reading books as opposed to magazines or other sources of literature. Advice piece number 3. So always write and read with the ear, not with the eye. You should hear every sentence you write as if it was being read aloud or spoken. And if it doesn't sound nice, try again. So when you're writing, whether it's for music, lyrics, poetry, fiction, whatever it is, put yourself in the reader or listener's place. The listener should only remember the image that you leave in their minds, and they should so clearly understand what you mean to say that there's no doubt or question about it. Because if they're confused, if there's anything that sounds jumbled or just off, they're going to be focused on trying to decipher what you meant to say rather than being on to your next point. So they might actually get lost and have to replay or reread what you've written because they're confused. So it's really important that what you write actually sounds good and makes sense and is very clear. This is especially important for poetry or songwriting, writing lyrics, because if the lyrics of a song sound off, it can make or break if your song is received well. All right. Advice piece number 4. Write about what really interests you, whether it's real things or imaginary things and nothing else. And notice this means that if you are interested only in writing, you will never be a writer because you'll have nothing to write about. And I think the point of this piece of advice is actually written between the lines, no pun intended. It is important to cultivate interests. And it's important to cultivate interests in order to have ideas to write about, to expand your mind, and to not be stuck in one place and be stagnant. Number 5, take great pains to be clear. Remember that though you start by knowing what you mean, the reader doesn't. And a single ill-chosen word may lead him to a total misunderstanding. In a story, it's terribly easy just to forget that you have not told the reader something that he wants to know. The whole picture is so clear in your mind, in your own mind, that you forget that it isn't the same in his. I think this one's pretty straightforward, and I think that I saw an example of this in Andy Schaaf's songwriting. He talked about this in an interview, and I believe I touched on it in another video that I made, where he says that he wrote the lyrics for an album and then he decided to get a second reader or someone to look at the lyrics to make sure that they made sense and that it actually was clear what the story was about and that it still turned out well. Because I think he was saying how it turns out that some of the lyrics weren't clear and that it was confusing, and it was helpful to have a second pair of eyes go over what you've written. And advice number 6 is that when you give up a bit of work, don't throw it away unless it is hopelessly bad. Put it in a drawer. It may come in useful later. Much of my best work, or what I think my best, is the rewriting of things begun and abandoned years earlier. C.S. Lewis says. And I really like this piece of advice because even if you don't end up using that abandoned or thrown away piece of writing or song, I think it really serves as very good inspiration later. Whether it's that you actually liked it and you want to rework it, or it just shows you how far you've come, or maybe you really loved the piece and you end up wanting to release it or publish it. And that's why it's really, really important to save those drafts, those rough drafts, those pieces that you don't necessarily like in the moment, because you might surprise yourself and enjoy it later, or if not, I find it still really serves as motivation to continue creating. And whenever I've done this and look back at old pieces and listen to old recordings of songs, drafts, things like that, I really felt motivation to create again, and it kind of felt like my creativity is reinvigorated by seeing stuff that I've done in the past, even if I don't end up using it. So I really, really love advice number 6. All right. Number 7. Don't use a typewriter. The noise will destroy your sense of rhythm, which still needs years of training. So I think that because this was written by C.S. Lewis to a young student in America, and it's 1959, he's mentioning that this child, I'm assuming, sense of rhythm is needing years of training still. It kind of sounds silly to say that now in advice, but I can see where he was coming from. I agree that handwriting with pen and paper is best for writing, if you are able to. But if you're not able to, or if you only have access to a keyboard or computer, then that's still okay too. But try to do it in such a way that you're free from distraction. So I like stuff like, so you can go into distraction-free mode when you're writing on your computer, or you can find websites where it kind of creates like this distraction-free zone for your writing, so it closes everything else out so you don't have other tabs visible. And it's kind of, and it's more like writing on paper in that regard. But if you can write on pen and paper, I still think that there's something about directly putting our thoughts to paper with our hand that allows our mind and thoughts to flow freely and clearly. So I often do write in my notes app on my phone. I'm guilty of that, especially like little poems or little song ideas. But then I find that, let's say I am out in public somewhere and I suddenly get an idea for a song or lyrics or a poem or whatever it is, I'll write it down. I'll write the whole thing down even in my notes app, if that's all I have, right? But then I'll go home later or later that week and I'll rewrite it by hand, because then as I'm writing it out by hand, I'll notice little discrepancies or things that could be fine-tuned or changed or just sound better. And somehow doing it by hand, I find I can hear it more, and it's just a better outcome, I find. It's clearer, it's less, I don't know. There's just something about the screen I find is kind of like there's something about the screen I find is almost like a barrier to properly writing, to properly connecting with myself and with what I want to write. So those are just some of my thoughts on that. And I don't know, I guess I just find I'm much more present and focused when I write with pen and paper. So if that's something that you're not doing, I highly recommend it. And the last piece of advice, number 8, is to be sure you know the meaning or meanings of every word you use. Honestly, I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. But I don't know, is it 100% necessary? Yeah, it is. I thought about that for a second. I was like, yeah, no. You should know the meaning of what you're trying to say and the words that you're using, because you don't want to accidentally say the wrong thing, or for it to come across offensive, for example, or just, I don't know. If you don't 100% understand what words you're using and what you're saying, I think that could come back to bite you at some point. I wonder if that tip comes from him, like, having done that in the past, like using a word he didn't fully understand and then it coming back to bite him, because that kind of seems like a straightforward, kind of common sense piece of advice, but to be honest, I've never actually heard anyone say that, and I've gone to different writing courses, classes, like seminars, things like that. But he's right. You should know the meaning of what you're saying, especially if it could have potential double meanings. People could misunderstand it, so it's really important that you are clear on what you're saying. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel, leave a comment if you have any questions or thoughts about this. And yeah, on this channel I normally talk about the creative process, the magic of art, the artist's journey, and songwriting, but also psychology, crime, and other topics of interest. Basically anything that I find interesting and want to share or provide to you, like inspiration for creating, motivation, etc. And I hope that you come back, and thank you again for joining me today. I also have a Patreon that you can check out, and yeah, thank you so much and take care.